Chapter 5. Not caring about anything at the moment, Les tossed his bag of quarters haphazardly to the floor. It was late, and he was exhausted. Tonight had been too weird for him. He rubbed his big belly and lay down on his bed. The walls of his room were covered with posters for video games, anime, and movies. Pretty much anything considered popular. That's not to say he was a slave to popular trends. In fact, Hero Saga was not even a popular video game, but he loved it anyway. The only reason the arcade kept the machine was because Les kept it well funded every week. His grandmother disapproved of so many posters. She insisted it covered up the beautiful color her husband had painted the walls before he passed away. She was fond of the color cyan, but Les didn't care either way. He didn't bombard the walls with posters to cover up the color. He merely liked being surrounded by his favorite things. It made him feel good and whole, and he needed that. Speaking of whole, he suddenly couldn't remember when he'd last eaten. He'd completely forgotten about the encounter he'd had with Michael. Since he walked to and from the arcade, he'd worked up an appetite. He always had to walk or take a cab to get places because he didn't have a car, and Grandma had forbidden him from driving hers. She disapproved of him spending so much time playing those god-awful video games. It didn't bother him so much since he lived right down the street from the place in which he spent much of his time, but the walk had taken a bit out of him. As he tried to work up the energy to get up from bed to make a sandwich, he cursed himself for mentioning he lived nearby in front of Michael. That guy had been too weird. Les got up from his bed and headed to the kitchen. He knew his way around so well he didn't feel the need to turn on any lights. He froze for a moment in the hallway just outside his room. He could have sworn he just saw something move in the living room, in the darkness. He could also swear he felt something else in the dark, a presence dispelling the air around it. But what? He was about to flip the nearest switch to turn on the living room light, then his stomach growled. He patted his belly, then stared into the dark living room for a few more seconds. He could still feel the presence, but he almost didn't want to see what was standing there, watching him. Just make the sandwich and get back to your room, dummy, he thought. Once in the kitchen, he grabbed the handle on the refrigerator door and opened it. Then he froze upon seeing the horror that waited. There was a head inside the fridge. Its dead eyes were rolled up so the whites showed, its mouth wide with what Les figured was its last scream of agony. He was about to scream himself when a hand rested on his shoulder. He slowly turned and saw a dark figure behind him. Les could barely make out the features because he was blocking the light from the fridge, but he could tell the figure had a finger to its lips. "Don't scream, Les," said the figure. "We don't want to wake up Grandma." Les recognized the voice immediately. It was Michael. Les nodded in compliance. Michael removed his hand. Les was no longer paralyzed with fear. He slowly turned back to the fridge. Marco Garcia's eyes continued to stare upward as if they were trying to look at the contents on the shelf above. "What did you do?" Les asked, turning back to Michael. "I gave him a choice, and in the end, it came to a fight." Les looked at the head again. "Looks like you won." He walked very quickly to his room a moment later, his heart beating painfully. Michael was right behind him. Les wanted more than anything to just slam the door behind him and lock the bastard out, but he was sure if Michael could rip the head off of someone, he could probably break down a door, and Les didn't want to give him any reason to be angry. He waited for Michael to enter the room, and then closed the door behind him. Michael looked around the room in awe. There were the life-sized replicas of Eslaine and Norak in the far corner of the room in front of Les's closet. They were facing each other, as if they were battling to the death. Eslaine was wielding what looked like a real sword, and Norak had a battle axe held high over his head, ready to strike. "This is really nice," Michael said. "Thank you," Les said nervously. He didn't know where this was going. What he wanted more than anything was for Michael to just leave and never come back. He wanted to call the cops and let them deal with it. But what about the head in his fridge? And where was Marco's body? He was certain the cops would have a few questions about the head. Les would tell them it was Michael, of course, but it wouldn't end there. They wouldn't believe for a second there wasn't more to it. Les wouldn't have blamed them either. Michael sat down at Les's desk and spun around in the chair, giggling like a kid. Les slowly sat on his bed. "How did you know I lived with my grandma?" he asked, remembering what Michael had said in the kitchen. "I know everything." Les remained silent for a moment, terrified by that notion. "I saw all the pictures in the living room," Michael finally added with a smile. "Why did you come here?" Les asked, trying not to sound frustrated. "I'm looking for someone," Michael answered, still spinning. "Who?" Michael stopped spinning. "I don't know yet." "How can you look for someone if you don't know who it is?" Michael thought about this for a moment. "I can't. That's why I need your help." "My help?" Les was astonished. No one ever needed him for anything. Well, that wasn't quite true. Grandma once needed him to give their dog, Skittles, a suppository. That had been an unpleasant experience. "Is it a guy or a girl?" he asked. "I don't know." "Are they in this state?" "Yes, in this very city. That I do know." "In San Sebastian?" he asked Michael, who nodded in reply. Les was getting caught up in his questioning. He felt it was time to ask the big one. "Who are you?" The answer to that question would drive you insane. Les didn't like the sound of that at all. "Earlier today, I asked if your dad was the devil. You didn't say anything," Les continued delicately. "Is he?" "He is if you want him to be," was all Michael would say. There was a knock on the door. Les jumped to his feet and came face to face with his grandmother. She stood in his doorway, much shorter than him. Her hair was silver and very thin. Her skin hung off her arms. She was wearing a dull gray nightgown. "Lester, who do you have in there?" "Just a friend. What are you doing up so late?" "My arthritis was bothering me, so I decided to walk around a bit," she said, rubbing her knees. "It's a bit late for company, don't you think?" Holy crap, it's company, Les thought. His grandmother had one of those thick country accents he despised. "We're just going over Hero Saga strategies," he said. "We're almost done." She tried looking into the room, but Les only had the door opened a little and was blocking the rest of the gap with his body. "All right. Don't forget to take the trash out in the morning." Morning, he thought. "Okay, Grandma," he said. She went back to her room. Les closed the door and breathed a sigh of relief. He sat back down on the bed and watched as Michael started spinning again. "Why are you looking for this person?" Les finally asked. "My brother said we need their help with something." "With what?" "If I tell you, you won't help me." Les was suddenly afraid to press on any further. He already knew he didn't want to help Michael find the person who was so important to him. And what about Michael's intentions with this person? "If I tell you, you won't help me," he'd said. He made it sound diabolical. "Do you want to kill this person?" Les asked. Not at all. That was something. Les felt a little better, but not much. Suddenly he remembered something. What should I do with the head in the fridge? Michael stopped spinning again. I'd get rid of it before your grandma finds it. Les stood up to begin his task, but then turned to Michael. Why did you put it in there in the first place? Michael thought for a moment before saying, I saw it in a movie once and thought it would be cool. You must have some crazy parents if they let you watch movies like that, Les said. I don't know about my real parents, but my foster parents were pretty cool. You're adopted? Michael nodded. My foster parents were killed. Oh, I'm sorry. They died trying to protect me from crazy people, Michael said somberly. I miss them. Crazy people? Les asked. Michael nodded again. The people in our town tried to kill my brother and me when they found out who we were, but our foster parents protected us. Les thought about that. Why would people want to kill Michael because of who he was? What was he, exactly? Les was too afraid to find out, so he dropped the subject. For now.